Help me hit 7,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and share your thoughts in the comments. I read everyone. Thank you. I never thought a single night could change everything. My name is Ethan, I'm 38, and I've been married to Claire for 12 years. Our life was ordinary, predictable, comfortable in all the ways people describe long marriages. Steady jobs, weekend errands, quiet dinners, shared responsibilities. But lately, that predictability felt suffocating. Claire had changed in ways I couldn't name at first. She laughed less, lingered on her phone more, and when I tried to catch her attention, she'd brush me off with an absent smile. I thought it was stress. Work deadlines, bills, the constant pressure of adulthood, but deep down I sensed something else. Something I wasn't sure I wanted to confront. It started on a Thursday evening. I had stayed late at the office, crunching numbers and finalizing a project for a client. My phone buzzed with a notification from Claire, and I saw the text before she even called. It read simply, "I think I need someone new, someone exciting." The words landed like a punch I wasn't ready for. I sat frozen for a moment, trying to process them, rationalize them. Surely this isn't real, I thought. But the tone, the lack of hesitation, the confidence in her message, it was undeniable. I went home that night, the streets eerily quiet under the amber streetlights. When I stepped inside, the apartment smelled like her favorite candles, but the warmth I used to associate with her presence had vanished. Claire was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone, feet tucked beneath her, hair falling over one shoulder. She looked up at me, smiled briefly, but it was hollow. My gut twisted, knowing what she had already hinted at. "Hey," I said softly. "Everything okay?" She shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe not." There was a pause, long enough for the words to hang like smoke in the air. I could feel the tension pressing against the walls, the silence screaming louder than anything she could say. I wanted to ask, to plead, to somehow fix what was already unraveling, but I hesitated. Something in me told me to wait, to observe, to see what she truly wanted without forcing the conversation. Later that night, I noticed her phone lying on the coffee table, messages from a man I didn't recognize. Their words were playful, flirtatious, a kind of intimacy that should have belonged to me. My heart sank. It wasn't just a text. It was a promise, an invitation, a secret doorway into a world I never thought I'd witness in my own home. The betrayal, raw and vivid, tightened around me like a vice. The following day, I couldn't stop replaying it in my head. I watched her from a distance, trying to find clues, anything that could explain how my marriage had drifted into this. She laughed at something on her phone, a sound I hadn't heard in months, but it wasn't for me. It was for someone else. And in that moment, I realized the fragility of trust, the delicate balance that had been tipping for years without either of us noticing. I didn't confront her immediately. I didn't storm in or yell. I wanted to understand what drove her to this edge. Was it excitement? Was it loneliness? Or was it a quiet, deliberate shift in her heart away from me? Every glance, every touch, every smile seemed measured now, controlled, intentional. And yet, I held on to the hope that I wasn't too late, that love, our love, could still anchor us before it all fell apart. That evening, I left the apartment under the guise of a work meeting. I needed air, clarity, time to breathe away from the tension that had become unbearable. The streets were empty, and I drove aimlessly, thinking about the woman I married, the life we built, and the invisible cracks that had widened between us. How had I missed them? How had we reached the point where she could even consider someone else, where I could feel powerless in my own home? Hours later, I returned. The apartment was quiet, Claire still in her place on the couch, scrolling, distant. I sat across from her, watching the flicker of the screen light her face, the subtle tilt of her head as she typed. I realized I had a choice. React impulsively and potentially destroy the last remnants of what we had, or step back and allow clarity to reveal itself. And then, just as my patience was wearing thin, just as the fear of losing her completely became almost tangible, it happened. A knock at the door. Not the soft, casual tap I expected, but firm, deliberate, urgent. I froze, heart thudding. Claire looked up, startled, her eyes widening slightly. "Who is it?" she asked. I didn't move, didn't speak, but something in the rhythm of the knock, the confidence behind it, told me this wasn't random. Whoever it was, they weren't ordinary. The air shifted, charged with tension, like the calm before a storm. Claire's fingers lingered over her phone, hesitating, the flirtatious messages left mid-sentence. And then, as if timed by fate itself, the door swung open. There he was. Not a stranger, not a friend, not a shadow from her imagination, but James, her husband, standing tall in the doorway. The same man who had shared a life with her for over a decade, whose presence I had almost forgotten amidst the haze of temptation and betrayal. The room seemed to constrict around them, the weight of their history palpable, visible in the way her shoulders stiffened, in the way his eyes searched hers. For the first time in weeks, perhaps months, the air between them held more than tension. It held recognition, accountability, a reminder of a bond that had been tested but not erased. Claire's lips parted, words hovering, but she couldn't speak them. James simply looked at her, steady, unwavering, the kind of calm that only comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you deserve. And just like that, the world she had imagined, a world of fleeting excitement, of forbidden attention, crumbled in an instant. In his presence, the allure of betrayal dissipated, replaced by the undeniable gravity of shared history, love, and consequences she hadn't fully considered. Claire's eyes darted between James and the messages on her phone, like a child caught in a storm she thought she could control. I watched from the corner, silent, as the weight of the moment pressed down on her. James didn't say a word at first. He simply stepped inside, closing the door softly behind him. His presence alone was enough. Quiet, unwavering, a reminder of everything they had shared. You were thinking about leaving?" His voice was calm, but every syllable carried the kind of authority that only comes from knowing your worth. There was no anger, no shouting, no dramatics, just clarity. It pierced the pretense Claire had built for herself, the illusion that she could chase something new without consequence. She swallowed, and her lips quivered. I don't know," she admitted, voice barely audible. I just... Her words faltered, the confession too heavy to form fully. She had imagined this night differently. Exciting, intoxicating, full of the thrill of temptation. But now, standing in the reality of her choice, she felt exposed, small, uncertain. James moved closer, not threateningly, not aggressively, but deliberately, closing the physical distance that mirrored the emotional chasm they had been navigating for months. "Claire, I get it. I know things haven't been perfect. But before you make a mistake that can't be undone, think about what we have, what we've built." There was a pause, long enough to feel like an eternity. The tension hung in the air like static electricity, heavy and oppressive, yet strangely cleansing. I realized then why these moments mattered, not for drama, not for spectacle, but because they were real, raw, human. She looked at him, her eyes moist, realizing she had been teetering on the edge of something irreversible. The phone, the flirtation, the fantasy of someone else. It all seemed trivial now, like smoke blown away by the wind. The presence of the person who knew her best, who had shared her laughter and pain, reminded her of the weight of love, loyalty, and shared history. I didn't mean," she whispered, her voice trembling. James shook his head, a slight, knowing smile on his lips. "You didn't have to mean it, Claire. Sometimes we get lost. Sometimes we forget what matters. But seeing you here, now, makes me realize that there's still something worth holding on to. Something real." The way he spoke, so calm and measured, was enough to melt the tension, to shift her focus from desire to understanding. It wasn't about guilt. It wasn't about shame. It was about perspective. About seeing the person in front of you not as an obstacle or a thrill, but as a human being with depth, flaws, and unspoken loyalty. I could see the change unfold in her face, the flicker of remorse, the hesitation giving way to clarity, the pull of long-standing connection overtaking the pull of novelty. This was no cinematic climax with dramatic music or exaggerated gestures. It was life, messy, emotional, and profoundly human. And in that simplicity lay the power of the moment. James extended a hand, not in demand, not as a challenge, but as a gesture of understanding. Claire's hand hovered over it, trembling, before finally taking it. The contact wasn't triumphant. It wasn't a victory. It was quiet, deliberate, a reaffirmation of choice, of trust slowly rekindled. The night stretched on, still heavy with unspoken words, but the energy shifted. The flirtatious messages remained on the screen, forgotten for now, overshadowed by something far stronger: connection, clarity, and the fragile promise of renewed commitment. They didn't speak much after that, just sat together, the silence now comfortable, almost healing. It was a reminder of what I had learned observing all of this. Temptation is powerful, yes, but the bonds we forge over time, through shared struggle and history, carry a weight that fleeting excitement can never match. People make mistakes, they falter, they stray. But sometimes, just sometimes, reality arrives at the right moment to remind us what truly matters. By the time I left their apartment that night, the tension had dissolved into a quiet understanding. Claire's heart had wavered, tempted by the possibility of escape, but the presence of James, steady and unwavering, had grounded her. He hadn't demanded loyalty. He had shown it. He hadn't shouted. He had reminded. And in that reminder, the fantasy of betrayal faded, replaced by the enduring gravity of what they shared. Walking back to my own car, I thought about how easy it is to be distracted by novelty, by fleeting attention, by the promise of excitement. But life, real life, is quiet, measured, weighted by choices and consequences. And in that quiet, sometimes the most powerful interventions arrive unannounced, reshaping decisions, mending fractures, and restoring balance. And I knew, as I drove away into the cool night, that Claire would remember this moment. The night she stood at the edge, ready to make a mistake, only to be reminded of what mattered most. The night she realized that love, when nurtured and respected, doesn't need theatrics. It just needs presence, patience, and the courage to confront truth before acting on desire.